Hi everybody, it's Laura from Green Tree. Sorry I missed you last week, but I was out of town. This week we are talking about salt. Now, I know some people are very pro-salt, some people are kind of anti-salt, but I think most of us would agree that it's definitely a flavor enhancer. And if you decide that you want to use it, it's interesting to know that there are actually a ton of different types and flavors of salt, and you want to use different kinds of salt in different ways. So today I'm going to kind of explain what some of those things are. The very first thing that's probably the most important to know is the difference between a cooking salt and a finishing salt. So something that is fairly fine, more of a table texture like this is going to be typically a cooking salt. That's like what you would have in your salt shaker, versus something that's a little bit fancier, like a pink salt in a grinder. This is something that you would use as a finishing salt. So when you think finishing salt, you think I'm going to put it on the end when I'm finished cooking to add a little bit of extra flavor or visual appeal. If it's a cooking salt, you're using it during the process of making the food. So the first thing we're going to talk about is table salt. This is the one that comes in the little blue canister with the little girl with the umbrella on it. This is the kind that you're going to find in a shaker at a diner. It's just like a white, relatively fine salt that is going to be sort of all-purpose. Typically, table salt is a mined salt. That means it's dug up from somewhere, and it usually has the minerals stripped out, so that's why it's so white like this. Now, you can also get natural table salts, like real salt. I'm going to get this as close to the camera as I can for you to see the color. You can see it has little specks in it, and those are the minerals. So this is a mined salt, but all of those minerals have been left in, so it has a little bit different of a flavor. Not quite as salty as regular table salt, but it doesn't have the additives and anti-caking agents that you'll find in a typical pouring or shaking table salt. Next, we have sea salt. Now, there are actually a lot of different kinds of sea salt, but all that it has to mean is that the salt is evaporated out of water instead of mined out of the ground. This is a coarse sea salt, so you can see it kind of comes in these chunky granules. This is actually very similar to kosher salt, which I don't have an example for you today, but it's a much coarser salt. And when it's kosher salt, it has no additives, so it dissolves really easily and there's no other off tastes. And it's typically used to kosher or preserve different kinds of meats. Think of corned beef hash, or whole corned beef really, and that is made with a coarse kosher salt. So this particular sea salt is left coarse. You can put this in a grinder and kind of serve it over the top of something, or you can use it as is. You're just going to have big crunchy chunks for preserving. And our deli manager wanted me to tell you one of his tips is to take this salt, and you can see like these are some pretty big chunks, and he will use it to clean cast iron frying pans. Like you can use it as a natural scrubber that won't damage the patina that gets built up on your frying pan over time. So that's table salt, sea salt, and koshering salt. So then next is pickling salt. Pickling salt looks just about like table salt, but it's very, very fine, almost like powdered sugar, and it doesn't have any of the anti-caking agents or other additives that you'll find in table salt, because those will give you a cloudy brine on your pickles. So when a recipe calls for pickling salt, it's because it does not want you to have those additives. If you're going to replace it with some other kind of salt, you want to find one that also doesn't have additives in it, or you'll end up with cloudy pickles. Then we've got flake salt. Now, I'm going to try and take the lid off of this and show you without spilling it. Wish me luck. Flake salt, and there's a bunch of different kinds. I believe this one is called Maldon. It's a French salt. But flake salt comes in these lovely little sparkly flat pieces. You can see it kind of sparkles the way that light sparkles on snow when it's really kind of got that ice crystal texture to it. And this type of flake salt is a great finishing salt. Now the cool thing about this is you can actually get it, sorry, let me get the lid back on this. You can actually get it in a bunch of different types. One of the kinds of things that you can do is use it as a finishing salt, and you can get a Hawaiian kind that's pink like Himalayan salt. So you can get big flakes of pink salt or black salt and sprinkle those across your food, and it's just going to give this little pop of color as well as the pop of flavor when you finish the dish. Now, the reason that those salts have an interesting color, like the pink of the Himalayan, or you can see the pink even better when it's ground, or the pale gray of the French Celtic salt, for example. So you can see if I hold this up next to a white salt, there we go, you can see this is a different color. It's like a very light gray. And this gray salt is the way it is because of it coming from a specific place. So there are naturally occurring minerals and different methods of harvesting that will give these sort of region-specific salts a unique color and texture. I really like the Hawaiian salts. I have a few of them at home. They're really beautiful, like a deep rose red and a dark black. But this is an excellent and really versatile one. If you want to get a regional salt, the gray sea salt is, I don't know how to describe it. It's almost moist compared to other salts because it doesn't have that anti-caking agent, and because of the way they harvest it out of the water, you can see when you tip it, it almost crumbles. These little kind of bits here. It's excellent for making flavored salts, which I will tell you about in just a minute. So the next thing is smoked salt. You can see this is pretty dark in color. You can get it made with a lot of different methods of smoking. This one in particular is an applewood smoked salt, so it is smoked with apple wood. It's literally done the same way that you would smoke meat, where you basically, well, with meat you would hang it. With salt it gets spread out on trays, and you produce smoke underneath it, and that flavor goes right into the salt. It's also the same way that you would add like a smoky peat flavor to a whiskey. It's by drying the malt with the smoke from the peat. So they infuse those flavors into the salt, and it's a great way, if you use it as a cooking salt, to give almost a grilled flavor to something that you've made in your own kitchen. You can also use it as a finishing salt, sprinkle it on top, and give it a little bit of that smoky flavor without having to expose it to any kind of open flame. There we go. So that's a smoked salt. Now there's another type of salt you may have heard of called Kala Namak. It's an Indian salt that is a blend of very finely ground salt with herbs to give it this sulfurous flavor. It's used in a lot of vegan and vegetarian dishes to mimic the taste of eggs. It can be a little tricky to find, but a little goes a long way. So if you do find it and you're interested in experimenting with it, pick it up and you'll have it for quite a while. So then finally, we're going to talk about seasoned salts or flavor salts. One that a lot of people are probably pretty familiar with is celery salt. So you can see this, it looks basically like celery powder, but you can see those little tiny bits of salt in it. So a seasoned salt or a flavored salt is one that's been infused with something else to give it an additional oomph beyond just that salty taste. Celery salt is nice because it's very savory, but I have also made some kind of fancy ones myself using this delightful gray sea salt. It's great because it has this kind of clumping texture already, so you can really get a lot of stuff to stick into it. One of my favorite ways I've done is to make a vanilla salt with it, where I cut up and stripped out the seeds from vanilla beans and put them and mixed them really well into the salt, put it back in the jar, and left it sit for 2 weeks. After that, I took it out and I pulsed the whole thing in my food processor to break up those husks into the salt, and it makes this lovely, wonderful smelling, delicate vanilla salt. You can use it to sprinkle across the top of cookies or other baked goods when they're done to give them a little extra flavor. I like to spread almond butter on brownies and then sprinkle a little bit of vanilla salt on top. And it's also a really excellent topping for grapefruit. I know that might sound a little weird, but try it sometime. Salt on grapefruit in general, like a coarse ground salt like this, is actually really nice. And then finally, I'm going to tell you how to make a wine salt. So you're going to take a bottle of something. I used red when I made it. I used a Malbec, but you could really use whatever you like. You're going to pour this bottle of wine into a saucepan, and you're going to cook it on low until that gets down to maybe a half a cup of liquid. You can find more specific recipes for this online if you like, but basically you're going to take this wine and you're going to heat it until it is very, very small. It's going to develop kind of a syrup texture, pretty similar to maple syrup, and that's when you're going to know it's about ready. When you've got that bottle of wine down to about that much liquid, you're going to go ahead and mix in a good amount of salt. You can use something like this gray salt, or if you really want to amp up the color even more, you could use a pink salt. And if you want to make sure that it's going to be something that you can go ahead and have an easy time sort of shaking later, you could go ahead and do it with a table salt, because it does have those anti-caking agents. But because of the wine, it's always going to be a little sticky, so I say go for the fancy stuff. It's going to last you a long time anyway. So then yeah, you just mix that all together, mix the salt in with the leftover wine until it has become one consistent mass. Spread it out on parchment paper on a cookie sheet and let it dry for a while. Boom, you've got wine salt. And if that isn't really tasty, I don't know what to tell you. So you just pick a wine that you really like and try it sometime. Takes a while, but it's definitely worth it in terms of flavor. So that's my salt rundown. If you have any questions about different types of salt you come across that I didn't mention here, or ways to make or use some of these more interesting salts, go ahead and throw them in the comments and I will be happy to check those out. I hope you guys have a great Tuesday. Bye.